Good afternoon, everyone. Today is December 1, 2020. I've heard some people tell me that we only have 31 days to go in 2020, and they're grateful for that. I think today I heard a quote that said, "I'm done with 2020." But again, we still have 31 days to go, and what a lovely time of year for so many of us, even though we can't be with perhaps all the folks that we want to be with. I asked for a song recommendation, given this is a work session. We always have to have one. And Mrs. McGrath suggested It's Beginning to Look a Lot Like Christmas. It's a great one, though we'd have to add Hanukkah and Kwanzaa to that. Then I got a text from someone suggesting Rocking Around the Christmas Tree. And I believe also Taylor Swift has a song with December in it, Back to December. Michael Bublé called December Night, but the one that resonates with me, even though I was a young'un, December 1963 by the Four Seasons, starting with Oh, What a Night. But of course, I was too young to remember all those and what that meant. Anyway, enough of me and my trivia. So with that, happy December, everyone, and I will call to order the work session for the Maricopa County Community College District Governing Board on today's date, and we will have a presentation today regarding the 4 disciplines of execution. And with that, I'm going to pass this to you, Dr. Gonzalez.
Thank you, President Sullivan. I was actually humming Oh, What a Night song in my head and trying to remember some of the lyrics. Late back in December, back in '63, what a very special time for me, I think, is how it continues. Before my time, but certainly a good song. So anyhow, thank you for bringing that sort of spirit to these conversations and lightening the mood some. That I think that's helpful. But good evening or good late afternoon, President Sullivan, members of the board, CEC, and guests. We thank you again for this opportunity and this collaborative approach that we seem to continue to take, where we bring to you as a board some of the major things that we're working on in our district and directions that we're heading in, and some tools that we continue to adopt. And your feedback is always so appreciative, and your guidance is welcomed. And I just have to say, I really like this approach. It gives us this opportunity to have a conversation with you as a governing board, and for you to ask the questions and to provide some input on our direction. So we thank you for that. Today we're going to be discussing 4 disciplines of execution. I've got Provost Fisher, who is going to take over from here as soon as I'm done, and then we'll be introducing someone to you who is going to also provide some presentation in this. 4DX shouldn't be a new name to any of you board members. In some of the weekly snapshots, I have talked about 4DX, and in some of our one-to-one meetings that we've had some brief conversations about 4 disciplines of execution, or it's also known as 4DX. And you're going to hear a little bit more about that, because in the end, what we're going to need is your support to move forward with this as a mechanism to drive how we accomplish the goals that we set, with some hyper focus on 1 or 2 goals per year, rather than running in 100 different directions with little accomplishment towards the 20 or 30 that we might typically set. And I'm exaggerating a little bit there, but I'm trying to to demonstrate the difference in the approach and the use of 4DX. So I'm going to have Dr. Fisher take it from here and introduce this presentation. And again, we'll be happy to answer any questions, and we look forward to your feedback and comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gonzalez. Ms. Sullivan, members of the board, Chancellor Gonzalez, CEC, and guests here at our work session. Thank you for your time and attention today. We wanted to share with you a bit, as Dr. Gonzalez said, about a structure called the 4 Disciplines of Execution, or 4DX. Next slide. So as we launch into this presentation, we wanted to take a minute to really talk about what's the problem that we're trying to solve. Oftentimes we can get into a situation where we see something really interesting and cool that we want to do, but we need to make sure that we're doing it for a purpose. And in this case, it's absolutely a purpose. We know that we have challenges making significant progress toward our success metrics. Those that have been on the board for some time have seen our monitoring reports. When you're dealing with a system this large with this many students, it can be very difficult to move those metrics even a fraction of a percentage point. So it takes huge focus and intentionality to make that happen. So that's one problem that we're trying to solve. And historically, of course, we function as separate colleges and a district office with lots of different multiple goals. And what we know about our history is the more that we spread ourselves thin, the less collective impact we can have. And so as we go into talking about 4DX, we know that we want to build on the momentum that we gained through our collective transformation work. If we think back over the last 3 years, the strides we've made have been tremendous in launching our guided pathways, in doing dev ed reform, in some of the integrated student support work that we're putting together, building up advising. I could go on and on. The technology tools that we've built, these things have been developing momentum and getting us to collective action, and we need to build on that as we move forward. And we want to have, as Dr. Gonzalez said, have all of us focus on the same 1 to maybe 3 important goals, as opposed to 3 or 4 important goals across all of the different entities, multiplying that out to 30 or 40 important goals, knowing that we can't make the kind of impact that we want if we're not all working together. And then, of course, we want to use our time and our resources in a focused and efficient manner. And so, as Dr. Gonzalez says, what are we requesting from you? Well, we want you to learn about 4DX and see how that approach can help us achieve our goals. And we want you to support our efforts. We're going to be asking for some budget approval. And we want you to help us maintain accountability. 4DX is really about accountability toward goals. And we need you to help us keep ourselves accountable, keep us accountable to our students and our communities as well. Next slide. And so today, just quickly, the agenda for today, we'll be talking about what 4DX is, sharing some of the core disciplines, the glossary, some other basics of 4DX. We're going to give you some examples of 4DX at work in the Alamo College District, where they've made tremendous strides, as well as some others, and 2 here in Maricopa that have already started down this pathway at Gateway and Estrella. And we're going to share costs and a proposed timeline. I'll be joined by Dr. Alka Singh, who is brand new back to the district. She was with us before as institutional research out at Glendale, and then as a key component of our transformation work. She left us for a bit to go to ASU and is now back. She'll be working in our enterprise performance office and really overseeing the implementation of 4DX from an operational administrative side. We'll also be joined by Dr. Maria Weiss, our interim president at Gateway Community College, and Dr. Ray Rivera, president at Estrella Mountain Community College, who will be sharing the 4DX work that they have happening at their institutions. Next slide. So why 4DX? Well, we know that successful organizations follow sound principles of enterprise performance management. These include, as you can see here, strategizing and planning, gathering information, understanding that information, that data, figuring out different scenarios, and then committing to 1 or 1 to 3 to really make collective impact. And of course, the feedback loop there is then measuring that and starting the strategizing and planning all over again. As I mentioned, in an organization this size, it can be easy for us to sort of do ready, fire, aim. And what we need to get ourselves into the discipline of doing ready, aim, fire, measure, ready, aim, fire. And so what we want is for 4DX to provide us with the kind of structure that will help us across these many organizations, many units, to come together to make that a reality. Next slide. So 4DX is not a silver bullet. It is not magic. What it is an operating system, and it drives enterprise performance by bringing everybody together on project and processes and methodologies and metrics and resources. And in just a moment, I'll even show you nomenclature. So we're talking the same language and we're doing the same work to get to the same desired outcomes. And so it's based, obviously, on 4 key disciplines. Next slide. And here they are. Discipline 1 is focus on the wildly important. We all know that we work in the whirlwind. Each and every one of us has our very own personal hurricane of activity that we deal with every day just to keep the business running. We have to carve out time to focus on the 1 to 3 things that are wildly important and make time to get those done. Discipline 2 is act on the early lead measures. So understanding what are those bellwether things, what are the canaries in the coal mine that can tell us whether or not we're on track to get to the outcome that we want. One of the biggest challenges with our data at the moment is that it's all lag, i.e. it's all in the past. So we know how we did, but that doesn't tell us how we're doing moving forward as we make tweaks and changes within our system to get better. Discipline 3 is to keep a compelling scoreboard. What we know of human nature is that we're all slightly competitive in a very positive way. And so keeping a compelling scoreboard so everybody knows when they're actually winning is a key component. And the discipline 4 is to create a cadence of accountability. As I mentioned, keeping accountability is one of the toughest things in an organization this size when we're doing far too many different things. But when we're all focused on the same thing, it's easier for us to understand how we're doing and how we're making progress to the goals that we've set for ourselves. Next slide. And I mentioned just a moment ago that there's a whole nomenclature around 4DX. And while I won't go through each and every one of these, and certainly you don't need to memorize them, knowing that there's a nomenclature, one of the toughest things in a huge organization is that we all talk different languages. Oftentimes we mean exactly the same thing, but we call them different things. So if you're talking about a WIG, a wildly important goal, is that a goal? Is that a stretch goal? Is that, name it? There could be 15 different ways we talk about it. But once everyone is trained around this particular management system, everybody's using the same language. We know exactly what we're talking about. And there's incredible value in that in an organization of this size. So with that, quick gloss over the very surface of what 4DX is, the key components of it and its nomenclature. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Dr. Alka Singh to take us further through the presentation. Alka?
Thank you, Provost Fisher. Good afternoon, President Sullivan, board members, Chancellor, CEC, and guests. Just building on what Dr. Fisher just shared, in order to implement 4DX in Maricopa, we would need to take 4 key steps. Next slide, please. The first step is developing a few key WIGs or widely important goals, like Dr. Fisher shared before, that are district-wide. The goal being to move away from vague intent to specific finish lines. Second step, craft supporting lead measures that will drive the success of the WIGs that were developed in the first step. Step 3, develop a compelling district-wide scorecard across the system. This scorecard will help update weekly and keep track of all the progress we're making on the different on the variety of work we're doing. And finally, step 4, create a cadence of accountability with the aid of weekly meetings focused on what has been accomplished and next steps. Next slide, please. Best practice shows us that we typically achieve more by focusing on less, but more important goals. As you see in this picture, when you have 11 to 20 goals, it can be overwhelming for the organization and employees, making it impossible to attain any of the goals successfully. On the contrary, focusing on few solid, important goals helps us attain our outcomes effectively. This happens because employees have their everyday and often very urgent work that needs tending and consumes their time. Having a few focused goals really helps employees take control, collaborate with each other, and move the needle in a meaningful fashion. Next slide, please. This slide helps walk us through an example of a system-wide WIG. The Provost teams have worked diligently with a wide variety of our stakeholders and surfaced 4 potential WIGs for our work together. Let's take a look at the first and topmost bar in this chart. It's called 2-year completion and transfer rate. We are currently at 11.7% with this particular metric, and our wildly important goal, or WIG, is to be at 15% by fall 2023. In order to reach this lagging indicator, we will be working with 3 lead measures that we can impact, and which will in turn move the needle for this particular lagging indicator. And they are re-enrollment or retention rates, timely credit accumulation, and student satisfaction. In turn, we would have a weekly cadence of meetings to track progress with all these metrics to ensure we're moving in the right direction. Next slide, please. Now that we've seen some of the mechanics behind this work, let's switch gears and take a look at colleges and systems that have successfully implemented 40X and related principles. The Alamo College District is a 5-college system, and they were awarded the Baldrige Award last year for their achievements with student success. As you can see on the left side of the slide, ACD awarded 12,759 degrees and certificates in 2017, which was a 224% increase over 2006. According to their chancellor, Dr. Bruce Leslie, this was all made possible by the successful implementation of 40X by all of their faculty and staff, which comprised of more than 370 teams for all of this work to be accomplished. Their efforts have also placed them way ahead of schedule, as you can see from the slide, with respect to the goals they had set for themselves with the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board. And this was all made possible with their efforts on 40X. Next slide, please. It is my pleasure to now introduce you to 2 of our sister colleges that have made significant progress with the 40X journey. First, Gateway will share their experience, led by President Maria Weiss, accompanied by Christy Warfield and Kathy Hernandez, and they will be followed by Estrella Mountain with President Ray Rivera and his team members Minerva Pargas and Chad Gilligan. Dr. Weiss?
Thank you. President Sullivan, members of the board, Chancellor Gonzalez, CEC, and guests, thank you for the opportunity for me to share some of the great work that we're doing at Gateway, relying on 40X as a framework for our planning. I want to acknowledge Christy Warfield and Dr. Kathy Hernandez. Dr. Kathy Hernandez serves as our 40X champion at Gateway, and Christy Warfield is our head coach. They are the 2 that really behind the scenes are keeping this moving forward. Gateway started exploring 40X. I think it was about the spring of 2019 under the leadership of our very own Dr. Stephen Gonzalez when he was serving as our president. I'll sort of piggyback on some comments previously about what problem were we trying to solve. Historically, Gateway engages in an operational planning process on an annual basis where we ask departments to identify what goals do they want to accomplish in the upcoming academic year. That process historically yields approximately 200 operational goals that we were trying to accomplish in a single year. They would roll up to maybe 13 to 15 college level goals. And as it's been referenced previously in this presentation, those goals were historically lag goals, meaning we would identify what they were after the work was done. And so just using enrollment as an example, we would look at our enrollment as compared to the previous year, like term to like term. We may see an increase, we may see a decrease, and not really know why that happened, because we weren't able to necessarily monitor 200 goals. So 40X presented an opportunity for us to focus, to provide a framework for our operational planning. We engaged in awareness building and training throughout the fall, starting in fall of 2019 through summer of 2020. And in fall of 2020, we began implementation. You can see on the slide, we have one college level wildly important goal. It's called WIG, and that is to increase the number of credential awards, certificate in both clock and credit, as well as associate degrees. And then from that, we identified 2 sub-WIGs, which I fondly refer to as WIGlets, where we drill down and give a little more focus to the college community around their efforts. And so one WIGlet is to increase our enrollment as measured by headcount. And again, that's in both our clock and credit programs. Our second WIGlet was to increase retention for students of color. And so in terms of implementation, we've identified 58 teams across the college, organized mostly by department or division, although some of them are organized from a functional perspective or a site support perspective. 45 of those teams have identified their own team wildly important goal. The other 13 teams really serve as a leadership role and oversight of the other teams to help advance the process adoption. Every single one of those team goals aligns with one of our college sub-WIGs. So there is definitely more focus for each of those. In addition to a team WIG, teams have identified a lead measure, just confirming or reminding you all that a wildly important goal is still a lag measure. And we ask teams to identify lead measures. What are those most important actions they know that they have control over that will help move the needle on the lag measure? And so those are called lead measures, and each team has 1 or 2 of those. At the end of the day, every member of each team has to make 1 or more commitment on a weekly basis that is aligned with that lead measure. What is the most important thing that they can actually do that week to help move the lead measure? The coolest thing about all this, at least in my mind, is that it's really building some team camaraderie. As part of this framework, the teams meet on a weekly basis in a huddle. You can see on our slide that there is a virtual huddle. Having to implement this in the remote environment has been a challenge, but I think we've really done a nice job in bringing together our teams virtually. And so they meet weekly, and at those meetings, they report out on each member's completion of their commitments. They identify new commitments. All of the commitments and the progress are tracked on a team scoreboard. You can see one is displayed on our slide. I know it's kind of hard to read, but what it does is it lists all the members on the team and gives some kind of a visual as to whether or not they met their commitments. Most of the teams have included a fun theme to keep the team engaged in their goal. It's really, they get to create it. And so we have seen everything from your standard spreadsheet tracking to, you can see here, this team, their theme was around Pac-Man, and that's to keep them engaged. I will share that there's been some really good work done by different teams, a lot of creativity from teams that didn't necessarily understand how they'd be able to move the needle. But we do have every department in the college engaged in specific activities that are focused on our college WIG and our sub-WIGs. So again, I thank you for the opportunity to share some of our good work. As we advance to the next slide, I'd like to pass this off to Dr. Ray Rivera.
Thank you, President Wise. President Sullivan, members of the governing board, Chancellor Gonzalez, CEC, and guests. It's my pleasure to talk a little bit about the process here at EMCC for 40X. Just to kind of provide some context about what I started as president in July of 2019. And during that time, we had just completed a core value survey. And it was pretty apparent that one of the most outstanding issues that was brought forward by the college community was this appearance that EMCC had too many initiatives. So in other words, initiative overload at a college level. At the same time, we were looking at data, and it was pretty apparent that our graduation rates were not as competitive as our sister colleges, and actually pretty well below the community college average for two-year colleges across the nation. So one of the things that we did as our leadership council is we kind of looked at what can we do to, is there a tool that we can utilize to provide some focus on these two issues in terms of initiative overload, and then also a focus on increasing our graduation rates. And what we found at the time was the 4DX process. Because of COVID, unfortunately, we're about a year behind where Gateway is right now. But we are really excited because, as you can see, we have a very similar college-wide WIG, which has increased the number of graduates and completers with equity from 1,019 to 1,274 by August 2023. And the with equity part means that we're actively looking at the equity gaps that may exist between various populations at EMCC. And it's kind of hard to read, but our wiglets are down in the bottom there, those three little boxes. They have to deal with making EMCC a great place to work, which is going to be measured by our Noah Levitts. We do have some enrollments, an enrollments wiglet that's in the middle there. And then also we want to increase our fall to spring retention. So these are all going to be supporting our WIG. So given this, I do want to turn this over to our champions. We have Dr. Minerva Pargas, who's my executive assistant, and then our associate vice president for technology, Chad Galligan. I want to have both of them talk a little bit about where we are now and kind of what the plan is within the next few semesters here. So Minerva and Chad, would you please continue?
Hello, everyone. Thank you. My name is Chad Galligan. I'm the AVP for IT at Estrella. We have been working with 4DX for since the spring, and then COVID hit and we got a bit of a delay. But this fall, we really have hit the ground running and are really making progress. We currently have 52 teams on campus, so it's broken up mostly by a Gateway, mostly by department and division. But 52 teams across the campus, and we, Dr. Pargas and I, have worked with them to define their structure, define their team leads, and we've also recruited 17 coaches from around campus to serve as resources for those teams. So we're currently working with them to finalize the development of those team WIGs, and so that they can start to begin the progress of implementing 4DX in their area. I'll let Dr. Pargas talk about lead measures.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Dr. Pargas. I'm at Estrella Mountain Community College. And we, like Chad said, we have been working with the teams and the coaches to develop lead measures for every team and to identify those. In December, we are getting ready to launch the team review process for some of our teams that are ready to go. And in the future, we're going to be doing a soft launch in the spring 2021, leading into a full implementation of the 4DX process at EMCC for the fall 2021. Does anybody have any clarifying questions that we can answer?
Okay, thank you, Chad and Minerva, for that quick presentation. I do want to conclude by saying that the purpose of us pursuing 4DX is that, our strategic plan in the past was very broad, very wide, with many different strategies. So it was really unclear as an institution what we needed to do to focus on in terms of resources, whether they be people or actual financial resources. And so we're hopeful that through the innovation from each of the division areas, the 52 areas that they mentioned earlier, that it can provide the institution a little bit more focus so that we can see what is actually moving the needle in terms of student success, and then move resources accordingly. So thank you for this opportunity to present.
Thank you, Dr. Rivera. Next slide, please. Now for our fourth and final example of how the principles of Lean and 4DX are being used very successfully by government in our very own state of Arizona. Under the leadership of Governor Doug Ducey, our more than 100 state agencies committed close to 10 years ago to becoming more results-driven, track their progress on scorecards, and share best practices to enable a lean and efficient government for Arizona citizens. Next slide, please. The Arizona Management System was established in 2015. The AMS is basically a set of tools and behaviors that creates and supports the culture of continuous improvement. There are several examples on their website demonstrating the progress that a system can make when employees become laser focused on their goals by tracking them and holding themselves and each other's accountable. One that many of us have probably experienced firsthand, and that is the wait time at the DMV office. The DMV employees and teams have worked together and reduced wait time from over an hour to close to 20 to 30 minutes now. I was reading on their website that this work has resulted in saving Arizona citizens more than 1.3 million hours in wait time, which is pretty incredible. And they've been using this philosophy and principle that we've been talking about today with 40X. Another example is one where all of the governor's cabinet agencies came together, and the purpose was to reduce permit processing time for a single permit by 50%. And they attained that particular WIG or lagging indicator by working collectively as 36 agencies. So he has 36 cabinet agencies. They got together to accomplish that by following principles of lean and 40X. Next slide, please. This is a little hard to read, but this is meant to be more of a conceptual framework. On this slide, we share a proposed timeline with you from fall 2020 through spring 2022. This is only meant to be a quick overview, and our teams will be fleshing out a more detailed timeline in the near future. The very first row includes our introductory work on 40X and the approval process with the board, followed by upcoming updates and communications on an ongoing basis. The second row, where you see all the colleges listed, that demonstrates or displays the various phases where our colleges are with the work of 40X at this point in time. And we will keep you posted as this work evolves across our entire system. The third and final row basically parcels out how the work will be implemented over the next several semesters district-wide once this work is approved. And we're doing this system-wide. This includes socializing 40X across the system, communication and training, establishing teams for the work, designing, building, and implementing. With that, I would like to turn the presentation back to Provost Fisher, and she will be providing information on cost and next steps. Thank you. Dr. Fisher.
Thank you, Dr. Singh. So you've seen the overview of how the 40X system works. You've seen some examples of where it's really driven successful implementations in government agencies, in a couple of our sister colleges that are getting this work off the ground, and of course at Alamo colleges. There is a cost associated with signing up for 40X to get the kind of support that we would need to do this at a systems level. As you can see here, there is year 1, year 2, and year 3 costs. Year 1 is the heavier lift. It has significantly more consulting and training, which would be necessary to help all of our folks come along and get ready to implement 40X within the 2-year timeframe. What I would say about these dollar figures, however, though they look large on a page like this, when you think about the size of our institution spread across 10 colleges plus our district office and all the work that's done at that centralized level. And then you think about the dollars that were committed for transformation for technology alone. The board set aside $10 million. Now, When Mark Cohn came on board as our CIO, took us and pivoted to a very different way of thinking about our technology, using the tools that we had, building on what we have, and facilitating work around that to save a lot of dollars. So we had huge cost avoidance within the transformation projects, specifically, and we talked about this as leadership team, specifically to save those dollars to do more impactful things with them. And I think that we would say this 4DX implementation could be one of the most impactful things that we could do with those dollars. And certainly as you look at the figures here, about $564K for year one, about $1.5K or 141, 126 in the third year. Those kinds of dollars for the kind of impact that this could have, we believe is a very solid investment in our future as a district and in our future success. And so if we turn to the next slide, as we think about where we would need to go from here, obviously we're looking for your support, both from the financial standpoint, but also conceptually, and to the idea that we would focus our entire district on making great progress around some very specific goals and reporting those out and holding ourselves accountable not only to you, but to our students and our communities and to ourselves. So getting your support in that way. Then we would need to do stakeholder engagement and to develop buy-in across our entire system. So information sessions with our faculty and staff, building out a website like we did for transformation. We found that extremely helpful so people could find not only the online FAQs listed here, but lots of information about what we're doing, the timelines, the budget, lots of transparency around the implementation. And then of course, lots of training webinars. We'd need to train up our 4DX coaches and champions. You heard from some of the coaches and champions at Estrella and Gateway. They are the ones that really drive the work at that campus level and then within our own district office as well. These are the people that know the system inside and out. Much like when we think about guided pathways, it would be the guided pathways coaches that helped with all the mapping, or in the dev ed reform, those coaches that are helping with helping colleges figure out their cut scores and other pieces and parts of dev ed reform. So we know that that coaching model works. We would want to train up 4DX coaches and champions. And then we want to make sure that we centralize our project management within the Enterprise Performance Office. The Enterprise Performance Office has been in existence for about 2.5, almost 3 years. They came on board when we were working through transformation. And what we find is that having our project manager centralized gives us a place to have all of the overview of the projects funneling into one place so we can begin to see patterns within those projects. And so we want to make sure that the Enterprise Performance Office is strong and has that centralized project management. But we want distributed change management. We need to make sure that the EPO is partnering with our leaders and coaches and champions throughout the system so that we're helping change management happen at the ground level. So project management, that oversight of the actual work in a centralized way, but change management, helping people understand the work and move toward the same goals at the grassroots level. And with that, we would end the presentation, next slide, and just open it up to your questions, your comments, your thoughts as we begin to think about implementing 4DX.
Thank you very much, Provost Fisher, for the presentation and for all of the rest of you who participated in presenting this evening or afternoon. I did not call roll for the board, but what I am going to do is call names of those that I see are present, and let's see what type of questions folks have. I have a couple, but I think I'll wait until we see where we are with others. And so with that, I don't see Ms. Nguyen on the call, so I'll move to Dr. Thor. Do you want to start us off, please?
I don't know whether I want to start us off.
Okay, let me rephrase that. Would you start us off, please?
Start us off.
Okay, there you go. Thank you. Thank you for leaping right in.
Well, first, thanks to everyone for this presentation, which I found very interesting, but also prompted a lot of thoughts and a number of questions in my mind. To be completely candid, I have quite mixed emotions about what's being presented, and let me explain. First, based on my 20 years as president of Rio Salado College, I know that these kinds of frameworks can be extremely effective in driving change. And as some of you may know, some 30 years ago, Rio committed to total quality management, evolving into a commitment to continuous quality improvement, in which we had all employees at the college receive 40 hours of training in the philosophy, tools, and techniques of total quality management. Subsequently moving on to focusing on Peter Senge and the fifth discipline and the importance of systems thinking. And it was those frameworks and that training that took place that allowed Rio to go to, the every Monday starts and all of the great innovation that took place at that time. So I really appreciate the importance of a framework, and I believe that training is absolutely critical. My hesitation involves a number of issues. One, several of you referenced initiative fatigue. And I am not under the impression that we have finished our transformation work. So I'd be interested in some comments about how these things integrate or not. Are we taking on yet another big initiative when we haven't completed the last one? I do like the concept of moving away from lagging indicators, which certainly our monitoring reports have been. And frankly, you mentioned monitoring report, which reminds me that we have not seen the one for this year. Normally that is presented to the board in November. What's been frustrating in the past about the monitoring reports is that they're presented to us in November, but cover data from the previous academic year. So, as been stated here, while interesting, it doesn't really guide us for the future. I like the idea of picking a few wildly important goals, although I was relieved to see the wiglets, because sometimes in order to get to a wildly important goal, you have to address some subsets of it. I'd be interested in knowing what will be the process of selecting those wildly important goals, and will the governing board have a role in that? And if so, what would that process be? The cost is significant, particularly at a time when was it last week that we had a presentation indicating that we would have to do an across-the-board 3% budget cut. And the budget that was presented to us did not address another important issue to this governing board, and that is that we address the compensation issues of our employees. So I'd like to have a better understanding of what the return on investment is of this $564,000 at a time where we're cutting our budget and not addressing the compensation issues. And then finally, although the slide was up there very quickly on the rollout, I believe only 8 colleges were listed, and if my quick review was adequate, Glendale Community College and Mesa Community College were not included, and I'd be interested in knowing why. Is that enough?
Wow, very good framing. Dr. Thorne, I think you captured probably.
So I suppose the bottom line is I like the idea of this initiative. I'm not sure about the timing of it, particularly when we haven't yet come out of a pandemic. We have a 15% enrollment decline, a deficit budget, and employee compensation and morale issues. And one other grievance while I'm at it is Dr. Fisher made reference to the budget that the board provided for transformation back in 2017, 2018, of $24 million. And I remember very vividly that our resolution asked that a separate budget be established and tracked so that the board would know exactly how that money got spent. And not only did a separate budget not get established, the board was never informed on how the money got spent. So it sounded like that Dr. Fisher thinks that some of the money that the board provided for transformation might be available for this purpose.
Dr. Fisher?
Okay, so I was making notes of the questions, and I think Dr. Gonzalez may want to jump in here as well. My understanding was that a separate budget was established. I'm sort of backing from the end to the beginning, if you don't mind, Dr. Thor. Was established. I can't speak to the reporting to the board on that, but we'll definitely check into that and make sure that we get back to you. I will say that when Mr. Elliott was still here as our COO, as we went into this fiscal year, the separate budget for transformation was dissolved so that we were institutionalizing the work of transformation within our organizations rather than having a separate pot of money to drive that, given that the major expenses around pathway mapping and all the large teams and the cost around that was wrapped up, and some other things were wrapped up. That was the decision that was made at the time. So the dollars are there, I suppose, but they're not sitting in a separate account to my knowledge. Mr. Moore is on the line, I believe, as well, and he may want to speak to that, but that was my understanding where we were with the transformation budget. And what I was trying to say was that, at least from the technology perspective, there was a lot of cost avoidance there. And so I understand the challenge that we're in, certainly with the 3% cut, and certainly with our desire to do something for our employees. The work of the district has to continue, and whether we make this kind of investment or not, we have to keep the work moving. We believe that this investment will help us do that in a more efficient and effective way, particularly given that we have such decreased enrollment. I think one of the things that I heard sort of underlying one of your questions, Dr. Thor, is the idea of innovation at the institutions. And I think it's important for the board to understand that 40X is a framework by which we can drive collective action around very specific goals, but it's not a way for the district to tell the colleges how to get to those goals. Each institution is unique. It has unique staffing, unique spaces, unique student bodies. And so how a particular college might want to approach their retention goal could be very different than the way another college wanted to approach that. 40X just gives us a way to roll that up so we understand the work that's happening across the district and the impact that it's having on our major goals. You spoke to the role of the governing board in 40X, Dr. Thor, and I think Dr. Gonzalez may have more to add on that. As I'd mentioned in the presentation, I think the important thing is for us to have regular touch points with the board where we're all really clear about the goals that we're trying to reach. And we're being very transparent, not only with the board, but honestly with ourselves amongst our institutions, but with our students and our communities, so we all know what we're working toward. So we're not just seeing a lag measure like enrollment with little context, and 40X helps us provide some of that context. And then Glendale was not included in the slide. I think there was another one you said, and I'm trying to, as I'm looking at the slide and trying to see which one it is.
It was Mesa.
Mesa. So Glendale right now has committed to achieving the dream and doing some work with them. And so it may take them a bit longer to come on board with 4DX as they get that work institutionalized. You know, you mentioned the idea of initiative fatigue, and we certainly don't want to do that to any of our institutions. At the same time, I think, unlike launching an entire transformation initiative, which was enormous, 40X is a way to come back in and shore up the way that we do our work, as opposed to 40X being an end unto itself. It's really a framework and a methodology by which we can all get on the same page around how we do the work and how we report the work and how we talk about the work, as opposed to being the work itself. And Dr. Gonzalez, did you have other things you'd like to add?
Thank you, Carla, or Dr. Fisher. I think you did an excellent job of responding to some of those questions, and it's particularly around the difference of whether we look at this as an initiative or as a framework in the manner in which we do our work. As you stated, the work has to continue no matter what we are using as a framework. And right now, I'm not so sure that any of us could consistently describe the framework that Maricopa uses. The image that it paints for me is that I think we can all agree upon the goals that we're trying to achieve. And if we equip that to jumping in a canoe to row down the river, we get in and we all just kind of row at our own pace in our own direction, and we end up just going in a circle. And so 40X I see as a mechanism to put us all in the same boat and to row expediently and efficiently in the same direction, and actually being able to track our progress and see our progress. I'd like to just share a little bit of feedback that I learned in communicating with some of the presidents that have implemented this in the Alamo system. One of the unexpected outcomes of this was the positive effect that it had on employee morale. And then I completely understood why this could occur, because one of the personal philosophies that I have as a leader is that we all in Maricopa have a role in recruitment and retention of our students. For some, it's much easier to answer the question, how do you have a role in the recruitment and retention of our students? I've had groundskeepers ask me that question, and I will sit and have a conversation with them and talk to them about their role. This presents an opportunity for employees to be empowered at the level of which this work actually takes place. It empowers them to make decisions about how they're going to do the work and how they're going to and how they're going to pivot and adjust to make sure that they're aligning towards this goal. This will give people that are groundskeepers, that are IT, people that wouldn't typically see how their work contributes to the overall goal of, say, in this case, students completing degrees. It gives them purpose and understanding now beyond their typical job description. If they're a programmer, they're going to be able to see on a weekly basis how their work ultimately contributes to the overall effort of what we've decided to do here at Maricopa. That's extremely powerful. That helps with morale. When an employee understands how they fit into this large organization, you tend to see some very different outcomes and a shift in the culture. So that's how I would respond to the initiative part. And as far as the process goes, there is a process of developing these WIGs. When we engage that gateway, it begins at various levels in the organization, and ultimately people have a say in what the WIG is. And so in the end, I wouldn't be surprised if we set aside the 10 colleges and put the 10 colleges in a room and asked them to come up with a WIGs. Would not surprise me at all if we all came up with a WIG that was very similar to the example that you saw here tonight, and that was the completion of degrees and certificates. You may see some slight variations of the wording, but at the end of the day, I think that's what we're really here for in Maricopa. We want to get more students through our doors, and we want to see more students leave our doors successfully, not leaving without a degree or credential. Because if they can leave with a degree or credential or the ability to transfer university, then we've been successful. And so I wouldn't be surprised that if whatever process we go through, that ultimately we end up with that as one of our WIG, if not our primary WIG.
Thank you, Dr. Gonzalez and Provost, and Dr. Thor, for setting the stage for a lot of questions that were probably on many of our minds. So before I comment, let me move on and ask Mr. Saar, what are your comments or questions?
Well, I appreciate everything that Linda said. I share those same concerns. Just thinking about a couple things, particularly, I'm well aware of what Alamo has accomplished because they bugged me about it for the last 4 years. But I know that there was more than just 4DX that was responsible for their success in that. And I'm getting that same feeling from Dr. Fisher that this isn't the end all, it is just a process. But I want to certainly find out what the relationship between these wild goals are to our policies, especially the outcome policies that we've had forever, and whether or not this will make the board more active in working with those policies to make sure we're still have relevant policies. Well, that's my question, I guess, if it makes any sense.
Yeah, that made sense to me. Go ahead, Dr. Gonzalez or Provost.
I want President Sullivan, Mr. Saar, I want to make sure I understand your question. If we as a district adopt a wildly important goal or more than one wildly important goal, you wanted to know how that ultimately impacts policies and the board's role in developing overarching strategic plans and goals for the district. Is that correct?
Well, we don't have a strategic plan at the board level, so that doesn't make it, but we do have a set of outcomes, 4 of them, and another group within that. So these WIGs that we're talking about putting together, are they in line with those policies that the board currently has, or will there be a need to reevaluate those to make sure our policies are relevant today?
I see. We would need to certainly determine whether there's alignment there. My guess would be that there likely is, but we will confirm that and back to you on whether some policy needs to be reconsidered there.
And I think, how you get there is part of this, and how we get there in policy are the constraints that we put on you as chancellor. And if they need to be reevaluated to make sure that you have the ability to work with this whole process to make it happen, that you aren't upside down from our policies. Finally, you mentioned, or Dr. Fisher mentioned, recruitment and retention. And in CTE, there's a third element that oftentimes is the most important of the 3, and that's placement. I really think that obviously our placement is hinged on whether or not our students are getting those degrees and certificates. And you don't get those until you have them retain their pathway, and we can't get them unless we have them. So, but I do want to make sure that somewhere in there, I hope at least, there's a placement piece to that whole thing, because in the end, that's what students are looking for. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Mr. Saar. Dr. Gonzalez, do you have any comment further?
No, President Sullivan, Mr. Saar, I thank you for that third item. For many years, I've said recruitment and retention, and while certainly placement is on my mind, I think that needs to be accurately stated too. Thank you.
I want to build a moment on Mr. Saar's comment. One of the things we were going to do this year, which we did not do, was to look at all of our policies and understand their relevance and impact. Certainly moving forward into the next year, I would recommend that happen. But this relationship, again, of outcomes and goals is really a critical conversation that at some point we should have together, board and stakeholders, i.e. administration, faculty, employees, and students. And as we're looking at goals, one of my comments was going to be, what is the issue of board? What is the board role? And I certainly appreciate that each college comes up with a WIG, or you look at the wildly important goal, or another nomenclature, the big audacious goal. But what's critically important is, what is the strategic goal of the district? And so where the board has not done a strategic plan, we need to really be invested going forward in thinking through and articulating our strategic goals. Because, for example, if one of ours is fiscal sustainability through revenue generation, which then leads to enrollment, and certainly the investment of enrollment ties to how do people achieve what it is they want to get to, i.e. placement, for example, or a higher wage, or whatever it is, all of that has to be integrated into this thinking. And my comment would be that the board has a role to play in those goal settings, which will impact how people identify those wildly important goals. And subsequently, then each of the participants in the system at some level come up with your wiglets and your, I was trying to remember all the other words that people use. So I'm building on both Dr. Thor's comments and questions and Mr. Saar's. I think that that is an element that has to be integrated into this process as we think about this moving forward. So enough of my comment right now, and I'm going to move to Dr. Narini.
Thank you, and thank you for the presentation. It was very interesting, and thank Dr. Thor and Mr. Saar for their comments too, because it kind of helps frame some of the thoughts that I was kind of going through my head. One of the questions: how did we land on 4DX? Because I know there's a lot of these different types of programs out there that help management styles and management goals and that sort of things. How did we land up on 4DX? Did we look at some of the others and how do we know this was the best for us?
Ms. Sullivan, Dr. Narini, I can respond to that from my experience as the president of Gateway. I attended a conference about 5 years ago in Fort Worth, and the keynote speaker canceled at the very last minute, and so they invited up the chancellor, who was Bruce Leslie at the time, and the chair of the board to come and give a presentation on their work on 4DX. And for them, they had been into 4DX about 3 to 4 years into the system at that time. And they were demonstrating the very impressive results as an implementation of that. At that time, it was something that, while it was impressive, I didn't know if we were ready for it. It just didn't make a lot of sense in that moment. Now let's fast forward a couple more years, and about a year and a half ago, the district was beginning to look at 4DX as a model. And on my campus, there was a session with folks from Franklin Covey to train some employees at the district office on its implementation and use. And Dr. Fisher invited all of the presidents and members of CEC to come and see more about what 4DX was. And I had a break in my day, and I went down and I sat down and I listened to it. And when I heard it again for the second time, it just really clicked for me that in the subsequent 2 years of hearing the session the first time, I realized that as a college leader that we were struggling to accomplish our, as Dr. Wise said, our 13 to 15 college-wide goals. We were making very little movement. And what I was learning about 4DX was that demonstrating to me that here was a way of doing things differently that would allow us to, and frankly, give us permission to focus on, one or two very important goals, and really being able to demonstrate that you accomplish those in a really big way. So that's how 40X came to light for me, and to see some of our sister institutions across the country implement this, and especially Alamo, because we often have compared ourselves to Alamo as a district, and to see the type of success that they had, and that they were able to prove, was very impressive to me as a college leader. So we did quite a bit of research. We even went and visited their college. We had peer-to-peer discussions on a college visit in October of 2019, and we came back even more impressed, and thought that if they could do it, we could not only do it as they did, but perhaps even better. And so that's how it came to be at Gateway.
Dr. Nrini, Ms. Thor, if I can add, or Ms. Sullivan as well, if I can add to that. I've been in 40X implementations at 2 other institutions that were incredibly successful, really moved the needle on some of the big things that we wanted to get done, particularly around retention. So that said, familiar with that, but also as we begin to see Gateway and Estrella Mountain, and Rio actually has begun on this process as well, to think about implementing 40X and begin that work. As we begin to see that kind of success within our colleges, much like the guided pathways began at 4 institutions, and we were able to grow that and scale it across the district. I think we find within Maricopa, when we can see those pockets of success, so that colleagues see colleagues doing really good work and seeing them being successful, that makes the implementation, the scaling of it, that much more successful and frankly easy within our culture, when people can see it's already gotten a toehold, a foothold within the district. And so to me, it makes sense to go with 40X. Dr. Nrini, your point is well taken. There are lots of different structures, but I've seen this one work really well, and we see it beginning here in the district already. And so I think that there's some real opportunity to go this direction.
Well, thank you. As far as the governor's Achieve 60, maybe I'm just making this up, is there some provision in that where the colleges get some sort of compensation for increasing their certificates and graduation diplomas? Is there some sort of, do we get any support from the state as we increase our number of certificates and things? Or is that just a hopeful thought I had?
President Sullivan, Dr. Nrini, that's something that we will need to look into to be able to answer that question for you.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Just one other thing, as we're looking at the estimates, the licensing, I noticed, goes up each year from 51,000 to 76 to 93. I would think it would go down instead of going up.
Is someone answering that?
Yes, President Sullivan, Dr. Nrini, that may have to do with the fact that we have 2 colleges already that are licensed and in an agreement that may taper off. And year 3 may accurately reflect all 10 colleges being on that license agreement, and not 2 colleges separately.
I see. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, I think that this whole idea of the goals and achieving them backwards by design sort of thing is something that's always very helpful, and something that I think as a board we can probably benefit from it as well as we go forward. But yeah, thank you for all that. Appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Nrini, any other comments or questions?
Nope, just that I think as a board we need to kind of plan out our goals and figure out how we're going to achieve them.
Absolutely. All right, Mrs. McGrath, your turn. Do you have comments and questions? Elsa, are you unmuted, Mrs. McGrath?
Let me go back and unmute her.
Okay. Mrs. McGrath, are you there? What are your comments and questions?
I share the concerns of Dr. Thor and Mr. Saar. And I'm also very concerned about the fact that this program is starting to be implemented apparently at 2 campuses, and we haven't been told about it. And we've been told it's going to cost $564,000. And when I add up all of these numbers over the years, I get closer to $1 million. And I'm very concerned that this doesn't solve any problem that I can see. We had a very wise man in the legislature named Tom Smith. And every time we would discuss a bill, his question was, what problem does this solve? And I can't see that this is solving any of our problems. Our number one concern right now is a huge loss in enrollment and apparently a huge cost increase in expenses, which doesn't make any sense, but we're told we have to find ways to reduce the budget. And I would hope that rather than going off and finding new goals, that our people would work on finding ways to reduce the spending so we do not go out of budget. And I'm just amazed that we can't concentrate on that goal for now, which I think is very, very important. Also, something was mentioned about the happiness, that wasn't the word used, but of the employees, and I would like a report on each month the retention. They give us how many people have left and how many people have been hired, but our overall rate of people who leave, I think our rollover rate's about 8%, which is extremely low, and that tells me that our employees are pretty darn happy. They don't get up and leave without a good reason. They either move away or they retire or they find a better job or a different job. And I'm just stunned that we are going off looking for new programs when we haven't solved the problems that we have right now. And I'm very unhappy with this idea of looking for new things to do when we haven't solved what we're looking at right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. McGrath. Dr. Gonzalez or Provost, do you have any comments?
President Sullivan, Mrs. McGrath, I'm wondering if we can go back to the slide I think that began with what is the problem that we're trying to solve, and hopefully that may respond to your question there. I'm trying to think of the other things that were brought up during her comments. And
Dr. Gonzalez, if I may.
Yeah, there's
just Ms. McGrath, your point about colleges starting something, you hadn't heard about it. Thank you for bringing that up. These were college implementations. They were well below what would be an investment that the board would typically look at. Our colleges start and stop projects regularly as they explore what works best for them. And so, as I mentioned, looking at something that's successful and beginning to scale it up, that's why we're bringing it to the board now. That's why you hadn't heard about it before, because it's a college level and well below the cost or the kinds of things that would normally come to the board. So I would hate for you to leave thinking that we had started this system-wide project without speaking to you. That's why we're here before you today.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Fisher, for jumping in on that response. The other thing that I would add, that in addition, one of the ways to increase enrollment is to improve retention. And we believe that through these efforts, the increase of retention would thereby increase enrollment. It is cheaper to keep a student than it is to recruit a new one. And so that would contribute to that effort.
So I don't, Mrs. McGrath, do you have further comment?
Yes, I do. They extolled the virtue of the huge enrollment increase in the San Antonio College District. Maybe I'm misquoting the town, but anyway, I'm wondering what their problem, what their retention and what their enrollment is right now. We've been told over and over that this loss of enrollment is nationwide, that all of the two-year schools are experiencing this. And I'm wondering if they've checked back with the Alamo colleges or whichever they are to check what their enrollment is and what their drop in enrollment has been. I have a feeling, because this is a 3-year-old study that they cited, 2017, and I'm wondering if we have up-to-date figures on this. And I don't know that this is our number one goal right now. Our number one goal right now seems to me meeting budget, and that we should be looking at ways to control our budget. And we're already doing, I think, good retention rate. It's just that, as been explained, everyone's losing enrollment with a different society facing us. And I think we're doing a very good job with the CTE students, with the construction and all these other students. So I just don't see any sense in starting this program when we have not solved the problems we have now.
Thank you. So I have a couple questions. I think as we've gone along, you've answered quite a number of the ones that I had, and certainly with Dr. Thor, Mr. Saar, Dr. Narini, and Mrs. McGrath's comments, we've covered a lot of ground. Again, you know, I like the idea of goals and people being focused on them. And I think a framework can really help achieve that. And at some level, it's not our decision what management tool you use to accomplish goals that are articulated. And so I want to acknowledge up front that I appreciate that. However, when something does blow out to the system, then it becomes an issue of support, and also it will impact certain other things as it impacts the entire district overall. So I'm curious on a couple levels, how are the colleges paying for this right now? How's Gateway paying for this, and how is Estrella paying for their investment in 40X?
President Sullivan, Dr. Wise, would you like to respond to that question if you're still on?
Yes, President Sullivan, Chancellor Gonzalez, thank you. Our current expenses for year one was about $48,000. And we were able to use money that were in contingency funds for that. Our year two costs are about $25,000. And it will continue to decrease as we rely less on Franklin Covey for support through that.
I see. Thank you. And so as this goes into the system, and this is a question probably for you, Provost, as the other schools, particularly Gateway and Estrella, develop within this process themselves, are they in positions to be trainers or facilitators to the other schools, or is that interrupt their attention to their own campus?
Ms. Sullivan, I think we would rely on their expertise that they've developed over time. But of course, they would not be the only trainers that we would need in a district as large as ours, but we would definitely want them to be some of our front runners.
And so within that, I mean, when you were anticipating the consulting fees of remote coaching, et cetera, did that take into account using any of internal coaches or mentors, or are those strictly external coaches and mentors?
So yes, internal for sure. The training that we would get from Franklin Covey and our external coaches is in a train the trainer model, so that they develop coaches within our system and champions within our system who then spread that word out from our internal champions and coaches. So it is a train the trainer model. And I think that's what you're getting at.
Yeah, I was. Better words than I use, so thank you. And when we're looking at this at a systems level, what funds would this be paid for? Is this coming out of, well, anyway, let me just leave it there. What fund would pay for this? I guess that could be a Gary question.
Yes, President Sullivan, if Dr. Moore is available and can answer that question, that would be helpful. Or Mr. Gary Aquinto.
President Sullivan, board members, Chancellor, CEC members, and guests. We're still in the design phase of this year's, or for this year's budget. You know, for any near-term expenses, you know, we would probably be able to squeak it out of this current year's budget. But as we go forward, it would have to be built in. And you know, I remind the board and everyone that the 3% reduction is a target, and we haven't settled that completely out. So as we move forward, we would build this into Fund 1 as an expense that we can track as a separate line item.
Okay. And so you're coming forward, Dr. Moore and Mr. Quinto, with a budget again sometime in January. And one of the requests we made at the last workshop was to integrate the compensation philosophy and potential expenses into that. So I guess given this scenario as well, it would have to be built into that, and recognizing that a 3% equitable cut across the board would have, I mean, it comes down to what do you take from in order to put into, I guess. And so then the rationale of this as a key priority, because I believe it was saying this could be most impactful, so that ROI translation would be critically important, I believe, in understanding this impact on the budget, rather than just looking at it as a dollar figure.
And Mr. Sullivan, members of the board, this is Gary Aquinto. You're absolutely correct. We're already engaged with our teams on the topics and the questions that came up last week from board members. So we're exploring all of these avenues, and our plan is to come back with another presentation on the budget sometime in January, and we will incorporate all the issues that have come up, including options for compensation, as well as how these additional expenditures would be funded if the board decides to go forward with those expenditures.
Okay. Thank you. Which then leads me to Dr. Gonzalez and Provost Fisher. What is the timeline on this for board investment? I mean, certainly we would want to see the budget before we approved any contracts. So what is your timeline on that?
President Sullivan, we would be looking to seek your approval in early spring for this, and sooner that this can be reflected in a budget that appears would likely reach approval through the board, then the better. Okay, so possibly a lot of the overarching approval would be contingent on seeing budget impact. And I think that has been a theme that everyone has mentioned from one aspect or another in today's conversation, is not so much, again, the challenge of what you choose to use as a management tool, but more in terms of its system-wide implementation, the idea of what are the critical goals, are they integrated with strategic goals of the district, and subsequently the financial impact. So those are more the overarching concerns that I heard from board members as this has been framed out. Again, choosing a tool by which one can focus at a management level is great.
And I really liked listening to Dr. Thor's list of all the ones that even in my career have gone through. Total quality management, then of course, anyway, just going on and on. So I appreciate that 40X is the methodology you've chosen for that focus. It's certainly important for a district to have that. But then there are the bigger systemic pieces that have to be taken into consideration in addition. And so I think we would know and understand the framework of strategic planning, goal setting, financial investment, sustainability, and what are the outcomes, particularly tied to policy. So those seem to be lingering out there as we move forward in your presentation, but in your own framework of this methodology. Does that translate to you, Dr. Gonzalez, with next steps or where to take this moving forward?
President Sullivan, members of the board, I think we've got enough to move forward on this and to continue to address the questions and concerns moving forward and how this can possibly be built into the upcoming year's budget. So, yes.
Okay, and the policy question.
And the policy question, yes.
And then if the board moves into strategic planning, it's integration with that.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay. Okay. All right. Well, do the board members, before we move on to the next stage of our time together this afternoon, do you have any other questions or comments on this topic? Just speak up if you do. I'm not hearing any, so I'm going to presume that we are concluding our work session on 40X and want to thank all the presenters again and the hard work that you put into creating the presentation for us. And thank you very much for your time this afternoon.